I never thought a word I had unheard in 20 years would find me again, and certainly not in the voice of a little girl coming out of an empty school's intercom. I was there because the city had decided to demolish St. Rowan's Elementary, and someone needed to clear the classrooms for salvage. I took the job because it paid cash, and because the building sat on the block where I learned to tie my shoes, where a kid once called me a name that stuck: Mikey. I hadn't been inside since graduation day. Walking back through that door felt like stepping into an old photograph. Everything faded at the edges, alive only in the smell of chalk and old glue. The classroom smelled exactly like memory: dry chalk dust, the sour bite of old glue, the faint sweetness of cafeteria pudding long since gone. Desks were stacked too high against the wall, posters peeled into soft curls. A window was cracked open, a hair was outside. A wind moved a banner on the flagpole and made the curtain tremble. My gloves left soft, pale prints on the desktop as I worked, sliding a box of crayon stubs into the trunk of the van. I was alone. The crew had gone ahead for lunch. I stayed to finish inventory. On my way to sweep the front board, I paused, because something about that first view made the hair on my arms rise. Someone had written a single word across the chalkboard in big, uneven letters that looked fresh, as if the chalk had just left the dust. Mikey. I stood there a long time, the broom in my hands growing heavier. The handwriting was childish but deliberate, the lines thick and a little smudged where a palm might have brushed through. Of all the names in the world, of all the ghostly phrases a forgotten room could offer, my own childhood nickname sat there like a summons. My first response was practical: vandalism, a message from local kids. But when I pushed the door open to look for footprints or a soda can, the hallway was immaculate, the floors still showing the old wax shine. No new scuffs, no recent footprints. The lock on the supply closet was still secured with the sheriff's tape we'd seen earlier in the morning. I told myself to laugh. I told myself it was a prank and went back to work. I scraped and swept and put boxes in order while my thoughts kept returning to the board. Cuts clung to my sleeves in thin white lines like veins. When it got colder, I pulled my jacket closer and, as if on cue, a dry static came from the ceiling speakers, a low, electronic rasp like wind through a badly tuned radio. The building's intercom still existed, though it hadn't had power in years. Maintenance had disconnected sections during battery cycles, but now the speakers hummed, as if the old bones of the system were stretching awake. Then a voice came through, small, unmistakably a girl's, close to a whisper. The tone was playful, the way children say your name when they're hiding and expect you to find them. Mikey. My hands stopped mid-sweep. The air seemed to thicken. It wasn't an echo of my own voice. It wasn't some recording on a phone. The sound had a texture I remembered from recess. Breath caught between syllables, the tiny click of a tongue. I clutched the broom like a lifeline and answered, ridiculous as it was. Hello? A faint giggle. The speaker hissed and then gave me another word, this time a little clearer, in line with something that could have been longing or accusation. I couldn't tell. Remember, I had to leave the room. The sort of courage that gets you through a dozen little embarrassments doesn't help when something in the environment speaks your name. I went to the lobby, checked the security doors, walked the corridor. The building was otherwise asleep. My radio was dead. My phone battery showed scant charge. When I checked the footage I had taken earlier, the classroom camera, the one I had set up to document the furniture, showed nothing out of the normal. Dust motes drifting a box. A single swath of chalk where Mikey leaned toward the bottom of the frame like a signature. Curiosity pulled me back. I stood at the threshold while my breath made small ghosts in the angled light. Called out into the empty rows of desks, "Who are you?" My voice sounded comically loud in the old space and left the same empty echo. The intercom answered again, and the voice was softer, as if the girl were standing very close to the speaker and trying not to wake anyone. "You promised," she said. "You promised you'd stay." The words opened a seam of memory I had kept stitched for years. A hand in mine on the playground, a pact whispered between two kids that sounded very adult at the time. "If we get lost, we'll wait for each other." I remembered a girl who'd laughed with a lollipop stuck to her sleeve with scribbled hearts in a margin, who'd moved away in the summer and whose name I'd heard only in half-forgotten stories since. I remembered promising things you make in childhood you never intend to keep, not because you are cruel, but because life grows without regard for small covenants. I should have left then, and I almost did, but a stubborn, compulsion-like thing kept me there. I looked at the chalkboard and leaned in. The letters of Mikey smudged slightly under my glove. When I brushed a fingertip across one curve, chalk dust settled on my skin like frost. The next voice that came through the intercom wasn't a whisper, but a breath, a small, bright sound like a child holding a secret. "Stay," the speaker said. It wasn't a request. It was a reenactment of our little pact. The hair on my arms stood up in rows. I don't know how I left, only that I ran down the steps and into the cold outside air. The bell tower behind me, silent as a watchful thing. My hands shook for an hour. I scrubbed the chalk from my fingertips until my skin burned. I told the crew what I'd heard, and they laughed and said, "Old houses make noises, and names are easy to find." But none of them had seen what was written on the board. That night, in my apartment, I dreamt of a small, chalk-dusted hand drawing my name again and again on a slate that never broke. I woke to the faintest pressure against my bedroom window, a child's small palm, perhaps, or memory, and a voicemail on my phone. One I didn't remember saving, with a single, breathy syllable. "Mikey." I replayed it until the clip lost sense and became only sound. In the end, the truth didn't unspool neatly. Buildings keep their own time. Promises, even those made by children, can be the sort of thing that anchors memory to a place. I don't know if the girl is still somewhere in those rooms, waiting, or if the school itself remembered how we sounded and decided to call me back. I only know that my nickname wrote itself onto a board like a bookmark, and that a child's voice can still say your name with enough intimacy to feel, for a moment, like being found. I thought we were the ones trespassing, okay? We were the only ones in that school, and whatever had been there for years had been waiting for company. When my friends and I climbed through the broken window of the old Whitaker Elementary, the night smelled like wet cardboard and old chalk. The town had fenced it off 5 years earlier after the roofs started leaking. But vandals and curiosity had a way of finding holes. We moved slow, headlamps stabbing through dust motes, whispers bouncing off the tiled walls. The place slept in layers, dark curtains of dust, the slow drip of a far-off leak, the quiet hum of a city that had forgotten this block existed. We found the cup almost immediately. It sat on the reception desk like a dare, a plain paper cup with a steaming curl of vapor rising from its rim in the cold, motionless air. Beside it, the linoleum was swept clean in a neat semicircle, as if someone had started and paused mid-job. One of the janitor closets had its door hanging open. A broom leaned in the doorway, bristles splayed like the fingers of a hand. Everything else in the lobby was coated in years of dust, except this small domestic scene. Steam, a fresh sweep, the faint scent of bleach cutting through the moldy air. "Maybe someone's squatting," Jenna whispered, more a question than an accusation. Her voice sounded small, without reverberation. We told ourselves that made sense. It's an overnight scrapper, a rat trap of a place to sleep, someone making instant coffee and sweeping because they were bored. We were urban explorers, not heroes. Curiosity was the point. We left a camera running in the hallway and moved down the corridor with flashlights. The school felt too empty, like a house you entered right after the owners left the room. Classroom doors sagged on their hinges, alphabet posters curled into themselves. A piano collapsed into a nest of broken keys. At the end of the corridor, the old auditorium's curtain hung in shredded strips. Somewhere, a speaker clicked, then sighed into silence. On the way out, I insisted on checking the janitor's schedule board, a habit from my childhood. When janitor's notes had been little mysteries to me, the board had a row of chalked initials and a time boxed in for the night. J. Whitaker, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. The handwriting was old-school block letters, the kind you could imagine a man with slow, even hands making. The last written line was dated 3 days ago. We left quietly. The window we'd crawled through was still open when we pushed it aside. The chain-link gate outside was padlocked. I checked the padlock with my flashlight before we ducked into the alley. It was old and rusted, but locked, the shackle tight and cold. Whoever had been in the building would have had to be inside already, or else impossible. That night, I put the camera footage on my laptop to review the next day. We had come back with shots of peeling paint and a shaky shot of the trophy case. We joked about thumbnails and likes. Halfway through the footage, I paused. The camera, left pointed down the main corridor, had captured something we hadn't seen. At 1:14 a.m., in the wavering black and white of the night shot, a shadow moved. It was slow, deliberate, a long stroke like a brush across the floor. The lens caught the smear of something wet, gleaming under the emergency lights. As the figure moved closer to the camera, I felt the whole apartment temperature drop, an irrational chill crowning the back of my neck. It was a person, bent slightly, someone dragging a mop. The silhouette was ragged, not quite human in the way it leaned. The shoulders too straight, the arm jerking at the elbow with a mechanical rhythm. The mop left a glossy trail under the fluorescent hum. The camera's audio, faint and washed, picked up the low slosh and the soft rasp of bristles on linoleum. But we had been inside the whole time, and the gate outside had been padlocked when we arrived. The timestamps were correct. My camera's clock was synced to my phone. I rewound and watched the frames again and again, mouth dry, my hands trembling. In the footage, the figure's head tilted up for a fraction of a second towards the camera, and the shadows seemed to gather like ink in the corners of the hall. There was no face to read, only an absence where a face should be, a darkness that looked back. We went back the next week with more people and more gear, the kind of confident group that thrives on bravado. The school was as still as a drained bathtub. No cup, dust lay thick on the reception desk. No recent sweep lines gleamed on the floor. No mop leaned in an open closet. The janitor's closet was padlocked from the inside, and the janitor's keyring that hung by the board we remembered was gone, the hook itself empty and bent. We set a camera in the lobby, another in the janitor closet, and left at midnight. This time, we watched a live feed from a car across the street, the glow of laptop screens painting our faces blue. At 1:12 a.m., the lobby camera caught the on-air fluorescent beginning to flicker. A minute later, steam rose again from nowhere, curling into view where the cup would be. The janitor closet door opened on its own an inch, and the mop slid out into the hallway, cleaning in slow strokes. The mop's motion was purposeful, almost ritualistic. My chest felt hollow, like someone had opened a drain. The janitor's broom lay on the floor as if set down by waiting hands. The figure that the camera captured that night was the same hunched outline, as if continuity were being enforced. Mop, slow stroke, shadow, repeat. We never found an explanation. No one in the neighborhood had been seen coming and going. No squatter shelter reported a man who liked to keep his floors tidy. The board with J. Whitaker remained on the wall, the time block unchanged, and the keyring never reappeared. The footage sat on multiple drives, copies made like talismans against forgetting. Weeks later, I woke to the smell of bleach. My apartment was locked. The window latched, but in the narrow glow of early morning, a faint curl of steam rose from a paper cup on my kitchen counter. The cup wasn't mine. I hadn't left one out. I hadn't made coffee. I thought it was a prank at first, then a dream, then a terrible coincidence. The footage we'd taken told a different story, one where a janitor had slipped through locked gates, where a mop kept to the same path, where a cup steamed in a lobby no one bothered to clean anymore. I still keep the drives in a drawer, watching the figure's slow, dutiful sweep whenever the house feels too loud. Sometimes, late at night, I swear I can hear the soft rhythm of bristles on linoleum through the walls. A distant, patient scraping like someone tidying up someone else's mistakes. I tell myself we're safe because we locked the windows, because the town fenced the school, because logic has edges. But every time the mop appears on the feed, it moves toward the camera, and the shadow at its head tilts up, as if listening. And the third time I watched it, the figure paused, and, impossibly, seemed to look straight into the lens. For a heartbeat, I felt certain it had seen me watching, and whatever that thing was, it had been waiting the whole time for someone to notice. The janitor, it seems, never left, and maybe he never plans to.
The bell rang at midnight, even though there was no power for miles. When the projector on the stage hissed to life and names began to scroll across the screen. They started with people none of us had ever heard of, and then, one by one, they started to feel too familiar. We'd been kids in that town once, the kind who grew up with the school's faded crest on everything from yearbooks to pizza coupons. The auditorium at Eastbridge High had been closed for years. Roof damage, asbestos, budget cuts, the usual bureaucratic litany. But the rumor was that the old place kept its own hours. A handful of us decided to test that idea in the only way we knew how. Sleep in it overnight and tell stories until dawn. There were 5 of us, me, Lena, Marcus, Theo, and Jesse. We brought sleeping bags, a cooler with more courage than sense, and a single battery lantern that offered a thin cone of comfort. The rest of the building was a different kind of dark, the kind that lives in corners and behind curtains. The kind that smells like mustard-stained theater programs and mold. We set up on the stage because it's what you do. Claim the spotlight for one night. Make it yours. We laughed about student council meetings and terrible performances until the edges of our voices thinned into the fabric of the room. The stage itself was an artifact. A cracked projector sat in its booth like a relic, its lens caked in a film of dust. To the right, mounted high, was the school bell, the old brass kind, with a rope that once swung with authority on graduation days. An honor roll plaque filled one wall, bronze plates black with age, names stacked like a history of townspeople who'd once mattered. The plaque had a soft, uncanny weight to it. We joked about trying to climb it like a ladder to immortality. Someone, Marcus, probably made a ghost story about the bell, how it would ring when the school remembered someone it had forgotten. We laughed and drank and told each other we were not scared. Power in the district had been cut the week before for maintenance. We knew there would be no municipal lights, no taps into the auditorium's ancient wiring that added to the dare. We relied on lanterns and phone screens, satellite time-stamped and reassuring because they were our proof against being alone. We set my phone to record just in case we wanted evidence for the group chat the next day. Around 11, the laughter died down. We lined the edge of the stage and watched dust rise from our movements, smelling dry wood and old paper. Theo had been telling a story about a valedictorian who never walked across the stage. Jessie fell asleep, curled against a theater seat with her knees pulled up like a child. The night moved with the slow inertia of old things, and then, precisely at midnight, there was a sound like a clock trying to cough a lung out. It was the bell, not a distant echo, but the bell itself, clear and honest, 3 deep tones that shook the rafters. We all sat up. Lena whispered the obvious, but the power, and cut herself off. There was no wiring hum, no mechanical clunk from a motor. The bell had been wound by hands that weren't ours. At first, we listened for movement, for the creak of someone leaving, for the scrape of shoes. Nothing. Then, almost immediately after the bell pealed, the projector in its booth sighed and coughed to life. I swear the term hiss will always belong to that moment for me. A long, wet inhale as the bulb found itself, and an old film wheel began to turn. The screen, a large rectangle like a pale window against velvet, cleared, and then, painfully, efficiently, a single name slid into view. Elizabeth Hart, 1949. It was in the same serif font you'd see on diplomas and library cards. A plate of silence followed. We said names of people we knew to break it. Probably a slideshow from graduation, Marcus said, voice too bright. The next name appeared. Charles Ruiz, 1951. They were stacked, one after another, like someone paging through a list. They were names from the plaque, people we had all passed as kids, without thought. But then the list did something that stopped the easy jokes. The names began to appear faster, and the spacing between them changed, irregular, like breathing. We watched between blinks as letters painted themselves on a screen that should have been sleeping forever. "Is this a slideshow?" Theo asked, but his voice was thin. The screen kept going. The names on the honor roll that had always been fixed, enamel letters on bronze, were now translating themselves onto light. We tried to rationalize. Maybe someone somewhere had loaded a digitized alumni roll. Maybe the school board left an automated memorial on a timer for when the building was accessed. Maybe then Lena's phone buzzed. She fished it out with shaking hands, a blue rectangle in the dark. Her voicemail notification displayed a contact name we all knew too well: Mother. She hadn't called anyone. The bell rang again, a softer, insistently human rhythm, and the projector added another name: Lena Marsh, -2006. We froze. The air tightened like a fist. Lena swore and showed us the screen. No, it wasn't a date of birth. Next to the name, in smaller type, a year we'd remember, because it was the year she had left school early. She had left after the accident, the thing no one talked about. Her face went pale, as if someone had read a word off a list that was not meant to be read. The next names came with a slow, terrible logic. Marcus's high school nickname, Marco, appeared, then Theo's full name, then Jesse's initials. Each name was followed by a year that none of us could explain. Some long in the past, some decades old, a few recent enough that they felt like a countdown. Panic is not cinematic. It is a small, hot thing that grows in your chest and reduces the world to the size of your body. We bundled candles and torches and tried to laugh. Marcus got up to walk to the projector booth, an absurd, defiant move, and the bell struck again, a single, clean note that shook the dust from the curtains. When we looked at the screen, the name there was ours. My name -2025. The room seemed to fold inward. The projector hissed as if tired, and then the light went out. In the sudden black, the bell's rope scraped as if someone had just let go. We listened to the silence like it was a threat. Phones had no signal. We called each other names in the dark, and somewhere near the back, a theater seat creaked as if someone had stood up. I don't know how long we sat like that before the dawn leaked across the seats, and the world filled with normal sounds again. Cars, a distant radio, a dog that could have been ours or someone else's. The stage light that had been a white eye closed forever. 2 hours passed. We left with more questions than we came with. The auditorium's doors gave way to a town that was, in daylight, as comfortable as always. But when we checked our phones and our feeds, and the camera we'd left to record the night, there was only static where the names had been. The screen held no proof. People talk in town about memory and the way old buildings hold on to habit. Maybe the bell rings for the forgotten. Maybe the projector remembers faces better than people do. All I know is that the bell rang at midnight, and the names on that screen were not just letters. They were a list that arranged itself to include us, as if the building were finishing something it had started long ago. That last night, as we walked away in the gray light, Lena kept glancing back at the auditorium doors. Her hands were white on the strap of her backpack. She told me later she dreamed of a stage full of faces looking out at her, mouths open in the same silent, expectant way. I keep waiting for the bell to ring again, not because I want to hear it, but because I need to know what will happen when it decides we've been remembered.